So, Peter, I just want to start by asking you about Donald Trump's fascination with Europe, because as you pointed out, he isn't just all about MAGA, which I know we're all familiar with. He's also now all about MEGA, which, as you point out, stands for Make Europe Great Again. I wasn't happy to read this, but tell us about this.
Just for the record, I made up MEGA. That didn't come from him. But
Yep.
what it implies is that he is fascinated with Europe, but not in a friendly way. He's fascinated with it because he thinks it's inimical to the MAGA movement and wants to convert it to the values of MAGA. So the whole Trump tribe considers Europe to be a project gone badly awry because it's become too progressive, too effete, that they do things like allow a full expression of transgender rights and yet don't allow full, as defined by Donald Trump, freedom of speech, because they try to do things like regulate hate speech and manage the social media harms that are inflicted on their society. So this has marked them out as the enemy. It's reminiscent of the way that China is irritated by Taiwan. China, obviously an autocracy that finds the existence of Taiwan irritating because it shows that a Chinese society can be a functioning democracy. Europe irritates Trump much in the way that Ukraine irritated Vladimir Putin, because it showed that a Slavic society right next to Russia could operate as a successful democracy against his autocracy. So these living models of how similar societies can function as democracies irritates these guys. And now Trump has found his Taiwan or his Ukraine, it's Europe. It shows that a large functioning system can operate on progressive values, not MAGA values. That's why he wants them to go MEGA.
Which takes us to something else that you've just written about, really, which is about, I guess, the allies of the MAGA movement in Europe and how they're being swept into power, arguably because of their MAGA alignment. So tell us about this.
The US in recent years, post the Cold War, has generally liked to try to stay out of other countries' political affairs. But the Trump administration loves to jump right into the middle of other countries' political domestic affairs and elections. The most recent was just in the last day or two, which was the election in Poland, where Trump had taken sides in favor of the right-wing nationalist Eurosceptic candidate, Karol Nawrocki. He had invited him into the Oval Office a month ago, which is a sign of endorsement. He had sent Kristi Noem, Homeland Security Secretary, went into Poland, went into Warsaw just a few days ago, and endorsed him and said, this guy has to be the new president. And the opponent, she said, was a train wreck. Standing in the capital of Warsaw in an election week, Trump officials, US officials, making these sort of statements. Now, as it happened, Nawrocki won. Trump got his candidate. But as we saw in Australia and also in Canada's recent election, a Trump endorsement or interference does not always serve the interest that Trump's trying to serve. It can backfire big time. Yeah. So it's not necessarily a blessing that anybody really wants. It depends on the country. We've got Romania, where Trump sided with the pro-Russia team. They lost. They lost that one. In Britain, well, of course, Trump is close to Nigel Farage from the Reform Party. And the Reform Party, although it's out of power at the moment, and Labour was elected only about a year ago, but Reform is currently ahead in the polls in Britain. And Farage claims that Reform has displaced the Conservative Party as the natural alternative government in Britain, but we'll see about that. He hasn't, interestingly enough, Trump hasn't taken overt sides in the politics of any of the US's Indo-Pacific allies yet. Yes. But interestingly, Steve Bannon did broadcast an endorsement last week of the Conservative candidate in the South Korean election that we've just seen occur. He endorsed him, but once again, the MAGA endorsed candidate did not win, and the progressive candidate won in the South Korean election by a decisive margin. So Trump's involvement doesn't necessarily indicate success, but it is an interference, and this is a new, at least since the end of the Cold War, relatively new conduct by American administrations, and countries around the world are going to have to be prepared for that. And the other thing I'd just point out too, Samantha, is that this is a new set of American values being endorsed and trying to be, imposed on other countries. The US, since World War II, was in favour of a much more liberal set of values where they supported democracy, they supported human rights, they supported freedom of speech in a liberal, small L liberal definition. This is a very different set of values and attitudes, and it bores right down into the detail of countries' domestic affairs, like their level of immigration. They criticise and take sides in other countries according to their immigration policy. So this is a completely different set of values.
Okay. And I just want to ask you how much pushback we might likely to see from Europe in terms of, Trump's and his administration's meddling, really, because we saw authoritarian expert Anne Applebaum. She made the point just recently in an interview about Hungary, specifically saying she wanted to issue what she called, quote, a regular reminder that authoritarian populism will make your country corrupt and poor. So how do you think European countries are going to respond to what's happening?
Well, they've already started responding in one sense, which is that when Trump made it clear that his sympathies were with Russia over Ukraine, when he precipitously cut assistance to Ukraine, questioned the value of NATO, we have seen one European leader after another say that they can't rely on the US anymore. We've seen the new Chancellor of Germany, the greatest power in Europe, say that he and Germany will pursue, quote, independence from the US, unquote, as a matter of national priority. So none of these countries is enjoying, none of the NATO allies is enjoying his interventions. And some of the countries we've been talking about, Poland, Romania, are NATO allies, and Trump is nakedly getting involved in their domestic politics. This is... Trump thinks it helps his cause and the MAGA values, but in the main countries of Europe, we see it backfiring so far.
Okay, now you've just mentioned that Trump, likes to nakedly get involved into other countries' politics, and you've written about a monumental announcement that I've got to say I had missed until you wrote about it, but it's super important, and this is something that Donald Trump said on Thursday, but how he plans to export his MAGA revolution to the world. So what did he say?
Yeah, so so until now, a lot of this stuff has been, you could interpret it as just Trump mouthing off rather than structured into government policy. But on Thursday, US time last week, the administration notified the Congress that they were going to create a new office within the State Department. They cut by something like 80% the existing Bureau of Human Rights. And they have created something called the Office of Natural Rights, which is a new phenomenon. And it seems that this is the vehicle by which, it doesn't seem, they have announced Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and in the formal announcements have announced their intention that this will be the vehicle to spread their values abroad through the State Department and its machinations.
Okay, so tell us about, what sort of values Trump's going to be championing.
Yeah, well, we know that they're MAGA values. There's not a precise definition of natural rights, but there is a precise definition of what natural rights are opposed to that we've seen from the State Department last week. The so-called natural rights, the Office of Natural Rights, is going to be opposed to digital censorship, as they call it, mass migration, restrictions on religious freedom, and numerous other assaults on democratic self-governance. But the one that Marco Rubio has most emphasized in the last couple of weeks in an interview in the US was the right of countries to come up with their own definitions of free speech. Every country has some sort of restraint, definition of what's acceptable, what's not, what's hate speech, what's libelous. Even the US has laws against libel and slander. They're very liberal. Trump wouldn't like that description, but they're very permissive.
Yes.
But they still have some standards,
Yes.
and every country does. And Marco Rubio has indicated that this is going to be the prime target. And if I can just quote him, it's an Oval Office priority. He says that's a new thing for us to have to raise in European capitals, but we do it, and we do it everywhere. And I personally witnessed the President and the Vice President raise it with multiple foreign leaders, and I think you're going to continue to see an emphasis on that in our diplomacy and what we talk about. They've already put it on the negotiating table with Britain, with Keir Starmer, where Starmer has said a review of their online safety rules, Britain's online safety rules, is underway because of pressure from Trump in trade negotiations. So it's now become not just a bit of loose talk or a preferred position. It's now become an item on the negotiating table where countries' commercial and economic interests are involved. Their ability, their right to define their own laws around speech, internet regulation and all of that are now a trade item on the table. So this is new. It's obviously got all sorts of ramifications for many countries, including Australia, because we already have a series of laws that have tried to impose some level of constraint on social media companies in particular. But as you know, there's a forthcoming ban that's been legislated by both major parties in our parliament that would prevent 16-year-olds and younger having access to social media. Now, you can imagine the Trump administration's line on that.
Oh, absolutely. So I guess tell us, how do you think we will be impacted by this? Because I know you spoke to Mike Green. He's an American living in Australia. He's the head of the US Studies Center at Sydney University, and he's super worried about it.
Yeah, he says that he thinks the ban is a really good idea because he has a 14-year-old daughter, and he can see the dangers and the risks that untrammeled social media platforms can inflict. But he expects that this will be a thorn in the relationship, and we expect that Anthony Albanese will be having his first meeting with Trump in the next few weeks. So it could well emerge there. We'll see.
And this is obviously, the backdrop to this is that we know that our e-safety commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, has been battling, with Elon Musk, I believe it was at the time, to get a video taken down on X. And that we've already had a struggle in this space. So I guess this doesn't foreshadow anything easier to come, or perhaps, I guess the spiky end of this is that our kids, our teenagers, they have just an untrammeled,
Well, according to the Trump view of the world, then an American corporation or entity can do what it likes and say what it likes, and that any country that attempts to regulate, control, or limit that in any way is going to be subject to punishment. And just last week, as part of this whole agenda, the US State Department announced they would put a visa ban on anyone from any country who's complicit in what he called censorship in America. So on that definition, anybody in the Australian government who's got any involvement with the policy to ban, for example, kids under 16 from social media, would earn a visa ban from the US. Who knows, maybe including the Prime Minister himself, since it's his policy. So this is the beginning. We're just getting a glimpse of how this new MAGA priority is going to be enacted through US law and US foreign policy.
Okay, so Peter, I've got to ask you this. I'm wondering whether all of this, everything we've discussed, might be sort of lighting a fire under the bodies, let's say, of Democratic leaders in terms of how they might fight against Trump, and specifically the Democrats in the States, because Democratic Congressman Jim Himes gave a really revealing interview to the rest of his politics just the other day about, why the Democrats lost so dismally to Trump. And he said his party was condescending, self-righteous around social issues, immensely annoying around things like pronouns, and just completely got it wrong in terms of the economic anxieties of Americans. So do you think the Democrats are listening? Like, are they taking note of all of this? Is this a wake-up call or slumber?
I don't think the Democrats have really adjusted to the shock and figured out the response. The critique of their election, which you've just run through, is entirely accurate. what's their answer? We don't know. It's not enough just to admit what you've done wrong. You have to figure out the future. And they've got some time to do it. It's very frustrating for a lot of Democrat supporters in the US that the party is still reeling around, punch drunk, not knowing what to do. But the party has to come up with a positive agenda for the future, not just a denunciation of Donald Trump. Can I add another thought on this natural rights campaigning and attempt to export MAGA values to the world? One of its effects is a tremendously useful distraction for Trump because of his sympathies with Russia, with Saudi Arabia, with autocratic regimes around the world. Because he's so busy waging these sort of political wars against European countries and democratic countries, it deflects and detracts from what he should or could be doing and what traditionally US presidents would have done with countries like Russia and leaders like Putin. It's helpful to the whole autocratic movement and mindset around the world. And in fact, the US has postponed the release of its annual human rights report, which is congressionally mandated. But they've delayed it, according to the reporting we've seen from the US, because Trump is redefining human rights so that he told an audience in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago, he said, we're not going to lecture foreign countries like that anymore. So that means the Saudis and the Russians apparently get a leave pass, but Western Europe apparently gets the lectures now.
Well, I mean, it's grim, but it's best to talk about this stuff.
It's best to know it and prepare for it.
Yeah.
Better armed than disarmed or unarmed.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, as always, for your time.
Always a pleasure, Samantha.